Hi, my name is Mason Duchatschek, and I'd like to share a couple ideas and perspectives that might be helpful to you. One of my friends got fired, completely unexpected. It was devastating. And he'd done this hundreds of times before to others because he was a human resource executive. And if anybody were to see a firing coming, it should be a human resource executive. But he was totally blindsided. And the fear and devastation, how am I going to provide for my family? What am I going to tell my friends? What am I going to tell my coworkers? Like, he was embarrassed, he was humiliated, he was scared, and saw none of it coming. And the sad part about it was he did a good job. He didn't do anything wrong. But that was the problem, was he did a good job. I asked him, I go, so tell me what you did at work. He said, well, Mason, I did payroll for our company. Great. Did you make mistakes? Was it done on time every time? Absolutely. No mistakes, on time every time. Correct. So what else did you do? He goes, well, I answer employee questions all the time related to our benefits or vacation time, things like that. And I immediately knew what happened. And I didn't have the heart to tell him. What happened is he did a good job, but a good job wasn't good enough. He was a transactional employee, not a transformational employee. There was a situation, I guess, where the company, which happens all the time, looked and said, what are the job functions of this person? And can we get these job functions accomplished for less money without sacrificing quality? And it wasn't hard to do. They probably looked at his job requirements and said, well, payroll, we can outsource payroll to a local service and get that done for a fraction of the cost. I mean, there's all kinds of payroll companies out there that we could hire to do that. And they said, well, when it comes to questions related to employee benefits and things like that, well, we've got a website that answers pretty much all the questions. We've got an employee handbook. All the answers are there. So what are we paying this guy for? And they looked at him as a cost instead of an investment. Well, by contrast, what does a transformational employee look like? Well, transformational employee is someone who has skill, knowledge, and experience that makes them exponentially more valuable to the company than anything they're ever paid in salary. And I will give you some very, very specific examples as it relates to, in that particular case, an HR executive. One of the best things that he could have done, hindsight's 2020, and the reason I'm sharing this story with you is I don't want this to happen to any of you unnecessarily, and want to help you be proactive so that your career advances and you don't have to go through what he's going through. So transformation, what does that look like? Well, I happen to believe in the concept of workforce alchemy. Right there on the shirt. Workforce alchemy, what is it? It's alchemy, if you recall from back in the day in school, we learned about the medieval art of trying to transform base metals like lead into gold. And of course, it was basic chemistry and that didn't work. But when it comes to people, alchemy can work and does work as it relates to individuals, to departments, and to companies. How do you turn lead into gold? Easy. Take a sales rep who produces $1 million in sales revenue for your company a year, and you surround him with people, tools, training, technology, and systems. You invest in him, in his transformation, and next thing you know, he's producing $10 million a year in sales. That is lead into gold. And you can do that in almost any position, any department, in any company. Make it more valuable by investing in the people and the systems that support them. But anyway, back to my main story. If I'm an HR executive and I'm sitting there talking to a potential employer or to a current employer, here's how the conversation will go, because I'm going to play the role of a transformational employee. We have this thing called the Workforce Alchemy Challenge at workforcealchemy.com, where any employee in any company can go and they can apply to take the Workforce Alchemy Challenge. And they'll get 94 minutes of training, employee selection, engagement, and retention. Then they're given a certification test, which if they can pass with a score of 80% or better, they're going to get a certificate and they can put that on their resumes, on their LinkedIn profiles, et cetera. And when they get into an interview or to a performance appraisal and the potential employer or the boss asks them, so what's this Workforce Alchemy certification? That opens up an entirely different conversation in which you get to demonstrate your value in a transformational way. Let me explain. If I were in an interview for a potential HR position and someone starts telling me the roles of the job, I might ask a few questions. I might ask them questions like, how many employees do you have? And they say, well, Mason, I've got 100 employees. How many W-2s did you produce last year? We produced 200 W-2s last year. Okay, so you lost 100 employees. Well, what percentage of them were hourly employees and which percentage of them were salaried employees? Well, for the sake of discussion, let's say they were half and half. Well, I can put a pencil to the paper, do a little bit of math and say, well, if they lost 50 employees and the average salary of their hourly employees was $30,000 a year, I know it costs about 16% of their annual salary to replace each one of them. So that's $240,000 in turnover costs just to replace the 50 hourly employees that they lost. What about the 50 salaried employees? Well, I can do pencil and paper and say, hey, if I got 50 employees and their average salary is $60,000 a year, and it takes 21% of their each of their annual salaries to replace them, that's $630,000 a year. So I had 630 and 240,000. That's $870,000 a year turnover problem. If I could walk into a company and say, hey, I know how to utilize employee selection, development, engagement tools, and here's some of the best practices and strategies being used by America's top corporations, I think we can reduce that by 30%. And here's how. I just save the company $261,000. That's employee selection. What about employee engagement? I hear a lot of companies talking about how much of a challenge it is to get good quality employees. And they said, we need to add more people because we have so much more work than we're able to get accomplished. And some of them are legitimately in areas where they don't really have that great of applicant pools. They're more like applicant puddles and they're muddy. Not a lot to choose from. So the option there is really, instead of getting more people, it's getting more out of the people you have in place. And you say, well, Mason, that's another tricky element too. Of course it is. I mean, perhaps you've seen the Gallup studies. Gallup says that about 16.5% of the working population is actively disengaged, hostile, and disruptive and trying to cause problems. About 52% of the working population is not engaged, and they're just doing enough to not get fired, sleepwalking through the day. And the rest, they're engaged, but that's such a small number that you start asking employers. Matter of fact, I asked an employer recently that a payroll of about 10 million. I said, you got 10 million in payroll. I said, what do you think is the discretionary effort of your average employee? And he pondered that question for a moment. He said, probably 60%. I think our average employee gives 60% of an all-out effort on average every day. I said, so you're paying $10 million a year in salaries, but you're only getting $6 million worth a year labor done for that. I said, yeah. So that's a $4 million a year profit leak. If someone was embezzling $4 million a year, how long would you wait to fix it? Because I'd fix it right away. I go, what are you waiting for? Well, what he's waiting for a transformational employee that can just show him how to fix that stuff. So if I were to go in and say, well, if I can show you based on my knowledge, skills, and experience, how to increase engagement by even 10%. So get from said 60% to 70%, I saved you $1 million a year. So you had that $1 million a year in employee engagement to another $261,000 a year in savings for reducing turnover. I'm exponentially worth more than anything they'd be paying me in salary. I'm better than free. And I haven't even touched on ways I know how to help them reduce employee theft or fraudulent workers' comp costs, or how to help them increase sales, which a transformational HR executive does know how to do. Obviously, I use the Workforce Alchemy Challenge as an example, but there are courses, there are peer groups, there are classes you can take. There are volunteer experiences that you can get involved with to develop specific skills, knowledge, and ability that your peers do not have and that your company does need and your company does value. So my encouragement to you is to be proactive and to look for ways to become exponentially more valuable to your employer than anything they pay you, because that translates into job security, faster promotions, and bigger raises. Doing a good job isn't good enough in a lot of cases. But when you're exponentially more valuable than anything they pay you, there's no downside to job security, faster raises, and bigger promotions. So I hope this story and this feedback is helpful to you, and we'll catch up with you next time. Have a great day.